CEOs have a reputation of being douchebags. They mistreat their employees, exploit every tax loophole known to mankind, and they aren't scared to put profits before ethics. Basically, every single well-known founder has this reputation, including Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg. Even the most cherished of the bunch, like Elon Musk, display many of these characteristics. I mean, 80 to 100-hour weeks are basically the definition of Tesla and SpaceX's work cultures. Many have argued that though these CEOs have produced tremendous results, it wasn't without sacrificing their humanity, and it often seems like such results are simply not possible without being a brutal businessman. But in reality, hundreds of CEOs defied this notion, with one of the most notable being Southwest CEO Gary C. Kelly. In 2021, Gary ranked number 4 on Glassdoor's employee choice list with an approval rating of 98%. Gary hasn't dropped the ball on investors either. Since he took over, Southwest stock has quadrupled at the peak. And let's keep in mind, this isn't a tech company, it's an airline company. So here's how Gary stayed on the good side of his employees while growing Southwest in one of the most cutthroat and low-profit industries in the world. Taking a look back, Gary joined Southwest way back in 1986 as a modest controller, not to be confused with a flight controller. By trade, Gary was an accountant who graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. Before joining Southwest, Gary had actually been working at an auditing company called Arthur Young & Co. So becoming an accounting controller at Southwest was right up his alley. At the time, Southwest was a rookie in the airline business who was simply trying to get ahead. The company had just gone public a few years ago, and each share of the company was worth less than $1 in comparison to today's prices. Given the small-scale nature of Southwest, it wasn't too difficult for Gary to work himself up to CFO by 1989. And this is where he would spend the majority of his early career. It wasn't until 2001 that Gary was promoted to Executive Vice President, but his next promotion came rather quickly in 2004 to CEO. Since he became CEO, he's embraced a couple of key fundamental values that have cemented Southwest in the hearts of its employees and customers, starting with a culture of appreciation. In large companies that employ tens of thousands of employees, the individual impact of each employee is often lost. Every employee is simply a cog in the larger machine, and it often feels like they're dispensable/replaceable. But Gary has made sure to emphasize that this is not the case. And I don't mean just verbally thanking or praising employees. Gary has backed up his words with clear action. Throughout Southwest's entire history, they have never laid off a single employee, not after 9/11, not during the financial crisis, and not even during the pandemic. This doesn't mean that Southwest just flew through these crises though. They were actually extremely challenging, and Southwest had to enact several cost-cutting measures. However, layoffs and pay cuts to regular employees were always a last resort. I mean, just take a look at how Gary handled the pandemic. When the pandemic rolled around, it was clear that Southwest had to make massive reductions in cost given that air travel demand literally went to zero overnight. Instead of laying off employees though, Gary targeted the other side of the spectrum, employees that were over 55 and approaching retirement. Gary offered pilots over the age of 55 2/3 of their salaries for 5 years, or until they were 65 for simply choosing early retirement. On top of this extremely generous compensation plan, Gary also offered up to 5 years of company-provided health insurance. Meanwhile, employees who were under 55 but had over 10 years of experience with Southwest were offered 1 year of salary and 1 year of company-paid health insurance. Given how lucrative this offer was, 17,000 employees or 28% of their workforce took the buyout, which was quite close to Gary's 30% target. I think you'd agree that this was literally the most generous way Southwest could have reduced their workforce. On top of giving employees a great send-off, Gary and all the executives took a pay cut through the end of 2021. Gary's salary was cut to $0, while the other executives' salaries were slashed by 20%. Gary also needed regular employees to take a pay cut as well, but he didn't want to impose it. So he promised that employees who took a 10% pay cut would have zero risk of being furloughed in 2021, and that their pay would be restored to normal starting in 2022. Throughout the entire crisis, there was no force or imposing. The approach was always, how do we get through this as a team? Maybe older employees can take early retirement, maybe executives can take a larger pay cut, and maybe employees can take a smaller pay cut. Southwest has approached every crisis with this same team-like approach, which has made the community extremely strong. And that brings us to Gary's second strategy, which is breaking down the executive barrier. As companies grow larger, they often have a tendency to become bureaucratic, and the key reason for this is little to no decision-making power for everyday employees. At Southwest, however, the decision-making process is completely decentralized. As we saw with the pandemic, it was up to the employees if they wanted to take a 10% pay cut and avoid a furlough, or if they wanted to keep their full salary and deal with the risk of a potential furlough. This decentralization stretches much further than just allowing employees to choose their own futures. A great example of this was when Southwest was developing a new uniform for their employees. Pilot and flight attendant uniforms are extremely important as this is what customers see on a daily basis, and it's essentially the branding of the entire company. Given the weight of this redesign, you would think that Southwest would hire top-tier branding specialists to guide the process, but Gary had something else in mind. Gary opened up the redesign opportunity to all Southwest employees. Every employee who was interested could provide suggestions for the new uniform, and the employees with the best suggestions were assembled into a sort of review team. Every 2 weeks, the team would meet up and guide the redesign process. Similarly, a significant amount of decision-making power is given to low-level managers and employees. Gary believes that these individuals are the ones that have the best understanding of the work they do, and that they can make way better decisions than some executive that spends their entire day in the office. All of this is based on Gary's core idea that employee satisfaction trumps everything, even including customer satisfaction. The truth is, customer satisfaction is directly linked to employee satisfaction. So, if you keep your employees happy, customer satisfaction will follow. This doesn't mean that Gary doesn't care about customers though. If anything, he cares about each individual customer just as much as he cares about each individual employee. If you've ever taken a Southwest flight, you might have noticed that they don't have business or first class, they only have economy. Originally, this was because Southwest was a budget airline and premium flyers weren't interested in the company. But today, Southwest actively chooses against adding first and business class. Southwest does offer something called Business Select, but this doesn't actually get you a better seat or service. Business Select simply allows you to move up the boarding list and it gives you some additional member rewards. However, you'll be sitting in the same seat and receiving the same service as someone with an economy ticket. By opting for no first or business class, Gary has been able to prevent an executive barrier from forming amongst customers and service. It's no secret that most airlines make the majority of their profit from business and first class flyers thanks to how much margin is built into those services. However, this creates a large discrepancy in how customers are treated, which goes against Southwest's core principle of valuing each customer equally. Customers who fly Southwest generally love this aspect. Flight attendants aren't prioritizing business and first class members, and economy customers are the center of attention. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to prioritize business and first class customers given that they're paying way more. However, by simply sticking to economy customers, Southwest is able to provide an extremely consistent and reliable experience to all customers. And speaking of happy customers, we have Gary's third strategy, which is not nickeling and diming customers or employees. Ever since 9/11, and especially after the 2008 financial crisis, more and more American airlines have been charging additional fees on top of the ticket price for checked bags. And as more airlines adopt this strategy, it becomes harder to compete against them because they're able to advertise cheaper starting prices. But the truth is, these cheaper prices are deceptively low considering that most people are going to need to check in some luggage. Southwest has avoided this by simply allowing all customers to check in 2 bags for no additional cost. This has actually become Southwest's most famous marketing slogan and is an integral part of their brand today. Unfortunately, Southwest can't actually offer the service for free as it costs money to transport luggage. This leads to Southwest starting prices to generally be a bit higher than competitors. But Southwest customers can be confident that the ticket price is all they'll have to pay. There aren't any hidden or additional fees that they'll find out about when they arrive at the airport. This policy also extends to other parts of Southwest business. For example, they don't charge any change fees or cancellation fees. If you want to switch from one ticket to another, you'll only have to pay the disparity in ticket price if there is one. By not nickeling and diming customers, Gary has been able to largely eliminate customer complaints. In fact, Southwest only receives about half a complaint for every 100,000 customers they serve, which is by far the lowest in the airline industry. Gary also doesn't nickel and dime his employees either. Right before the pandemic started, Southwest dispersed $667 million worth of profits to employees, which came out to roughly 12.2% of each employee's salary. 10% went towards the retirement plans and the remaining 2.2% was dispersed as cash. At the end of the day, the secrets behind Gary's crazy employee and customer satisfaction rates aren't actually all that crazy. All he does is give his employees and customers the freedom to make their own decisions, treats everyone as equals, and he doesn't nickel and dime anyone. You would think that these principles are pretty easy to apply. But given how many douchebag CEOs there are, this clearly isn't the case. But hey, at least we have a couple of star performers like Gary. What do you guys think is the biggest key to Gary's popularity amongst employees? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you think all CEOs should learn a thing or two from Gary. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.